My son's words stabbed me like a knife through the heart. "You're not welcome at our Christmas dinner." I'd bled myself dry for his family, $230,000 in mortgage payments, my life savings, my late wife's insurance money, all poured into their perfect house, their gleaming marble counters, their smug holiday glow. And now, his wife's elitist parents demanded I stay away, ashamed of my lowly carpenter hands tainting their fancy table. My chest burned with rage as I staggered to my truck, dialed one number, and obliterated their mortgage payments. This wasn't just betrayal, it was war, and you won't believe the fire I unleashed next. Smash that subscribe button, drop where you're watching from in the comments, and let's rip into this story. The sting of my son's words still burned as I sat on the plush leather couch in his Asheville home, the kind of couch that cost more than my old pickup truck. The air was thick with the scent of Sophie's lavender candles, each one probably worth a day's worth of groceries for me. I leaned back, trying to keep my voice steady, and said, "Ethan, I could make my famous smoked turkey this Christmas, you know, the one with the sage and thyme stuffing your mom, Clara, used to rave about. She'd say it was better than anything her grandma ever cooked." The words felt like a bridge, a way to pull us back to the days when family meant something more than a guest list. Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside me, his polished loafers scuffing the oak floor I'd paid for with a second mortgage on my own house. His wedding ring glinted under the light of their 10-foot Christmas tree, decked out with ornaments that screamed money. His shoulders hunched, like he was bracing for a storm. "Dad," he said, his voice low, barely above a whisper, "I'm sorry, but you're not welcome here for Christmas." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I blinked, my breath catching. "What do you mean, not welcome?" I asked, my voice cracking despite my effort to stay calm. Ethan couldn't look at me. His eyes locked onto the marble coffee table, a table I'd helped him pick out last fall when Sophie decided their old one wasn't elegant enough for her Instagram aesthetic. "Sophie's parents, Richard and Evelyn, are coming," he mumbled. They'd prefer if you weren't here." My hands went cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. "They'd prefer?" I repeated, each word tasting like ash. Ethan's voice shrank even smaller. "It's just easier this way, Dad. You know how they are about their traditions. They have their own way of doing things." I looked around the living room, my eyes tracing every inch of their perfect suburban dream. The silk curtains I'd paid for when Sophie complained about nosy neighbors. The crown molding that maxed out my last credit card. The built-in bookshelves I'd helped install when they moved in, back when I thought my sacrifices were building a future for my son. Every corner of this 3,500 square foot house carried my blood, sweat, and savings, $230,400 in mortgage payments over 6 years, not to mention the $50, 000 down payment I'd scraped together by refinancing my own home in Asheville's working-class West End. And now I wasn't good enough to share their Christmas table? "Easier for who, Ethan?" I asked, my voice low, trembling with a rage I hadn't felt in years. He flinched, his face crumpling like a kid caught in a lie. "Dad, please, don't make this harder than it has to be." Through the arched doorway to the kitchen, I caught sight of Sophie's new stainless steel KitchenAid mixer, a $2.5 monstrosity she'd insisted on for her holiday baking phase that lasted all of 2 weeks. My money, sitting there collecting dust. "Where am I supposed to spend Christmas then?" I asked, quieter than I meant to, the weight of the question pressing down on me. Ethan's eyes darted to the floor. I don't know, maybe you could visit Aunt Linda, or we could do something the weekend after." The weekend after, like Christmas was just some meeting you could reschedule. I stood up, my knees creaking after years of carrying this burden alone. "I see," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I moved toward the door, past the framed family photos where my face seemed to fade with each passing year, past the coat closet stuffed with Sophie's designer jackets. My hand gripped the cold brass doorknob. "Tell Richard and Evelyn," I said without turning back. "Merry Christmas." The December air hit me like a slap as I stepped outside, the warm glow of their house fading behind me. My truck's engine roared to life, matching the fury building in my chest. This wasn't just rejection, it was betrayal, and I wasn't going to let it stand. The cold December air clung to my jacket as I drove my battered pickup truck through the quiet streets of Asheville, the Blue Ridge Mountains looming in the distance like silent witnesses to my unraveling world. Ethan's words, "You're not welcome here for Christmas," echoed in my skull, each syllable a fresh cut on a wound that refused to heal. I'd given him everything: $230,000, $400 in mortgage payments over 6 years, $50,000 for the down payment on their 3,500 square foot dream home, even the $12,000 for their backyard deck when Sophie decided she needed a proper space for entertaining. I'd sold my old Chevy to cover their utility bills when Ethan lost his job 2 winters ago. I'd drained Clara's life insurance money, the last piece of her I had left, to keep their lights on and their fridge stocked. And for what? To be told I wasn't good enough to sit at their Christmas table because my carpenter's hands didn't match their polished silverware. I pulled into the cracked driveway of my modest West End bungalow, the porch light flickering because I couldn't afford to fix it. Inside, the house felt hollow without Clara's laughter, without the smell of her sage stuffing or the warmth of holiday gatherings that used to fill these walls. I sank into my worn recliner, the one I hadn't replaced in a decade because every spare dollar went to Ethan and Sophie's suburban fantasy. My fingers traced the edges of a photo on the side table, Clara and me at Ethan's high school graduation, her smile brighter than the Carolina sun. Back then, family meant sacrifice, love, togetherness. Now, it felt like a ledger of debts I'd never collect. My phone buzzed, shattering the silence. Sophie's name flashed on the screen like a warning siren. I let it ring twice, my pulse pounding, before I answered. "James," she said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she used when she wanted something like the time she needed $3,000 for a new HVAC system because their old one ruined the vibe of her dinner parties. "I heard about the little misunderstanding with Ethan," she continued, as if my banishment from Christmas was just a scheduling mix-up. "I know it sounds harsh, but you have to understand my parents' perspective. Richard and Evelyn expect a certain sophistication at the holidays. They're not used to your kind of traditions, your smoky mountain recipes, your stories about sawdust and lumber yards. It's just not their scene." My grip tightened on the phone, my knuckles whitening. "My traditions?" I repeated, my voice low, trembling with a fury I could barely contain. "You mean the smoked turkey and cornbread dressing you ate every Sunday for 3 years when you and Ethan were scraping by? The meals Clara taught me to make, the ones you said reminded you of your grandma's cooking?" Sophie paused, and I could hear the rustle of shopping bags in the background, probably another spree at the Biltmore Village boutiques, paid for with money that should have gone to their mortgage. "That was different, James," she said, her tone sharpening. "We appreciated it then. But now, with my parents coming, we need a more refined atmosphere. You know, conversations about art, literature, their summers in Charleston. Frankly, your stories about building bookshelves don't quite fit." The words hit harder than a falling oak. For 6 years, I'd bitten my tongue, swallowed every slight, every sideways glance from Sophie and her parents, all for Ethan's sake. But then she crossed a line I didn't even know existed. "Clara understood her place better than you do, James," Sophie said, her voice cold as the December wind outside my drafty windows. She knew how to stay quiet, how to blend in. She didn't try to force her way into spaces that weren't meant for her. My heart stopped. Clara, my Clara, who'd worked as a school janitor to put Ethan through college, who'd poured every ounce of her love into our family, reduced to a place by this woman who'd never known a day of struggle. "Sophie," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "don't you dare speak her name again." The line went silent, but I could feel her smirk through the phone. "Oh, James, don't be so dramatic," she said. "Clara was sweet, but she was just a cleaner who got lucky marrying you. At least she had the sense to know her limits." My vision blurred, rage and grief colliding like a storm in my chest. "We're done pretending to be family," I said, each word carved from years of pent-up pain. "You hear me, Sophie? We're done." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking as I set the phone down. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as if Clara's memory had been tarnished in my own home. I stared at the photo on the table, her smile now a reminder of everything I'd lost, not just her, but the son I'd raised, the family I'd believed in. The pain was a weight I couldn't carry anymore. It was time to stop bleeding for people who saw me as nothing more than a checkbook. The weight of Sophie's words, "Clara was just a cleaner who got lucky," sat like a stone in my gut as I stood in my dim Asheville kitchen, the cracked linoleum under my feet a stark reminder of the life I'd neglected for years. My hands, calloused from decades of wielding a hammer, trembled not with fear but with a fire I hadn't felt since I was a young man building my carpentry business from nothing. 6 years, $230,000, $400 in mortgage payments, $50,000 for their down payment, $12,000 for their deck, and countless other expenses, my life savings, Clara's life insurance. My own dreams all funneled into Ethan and Sophie's perfect life in their 3,500 square foot house across town. And for what? To be told I was too rough around the edges for their Christmas table? To hear my wife's memory insulted? No more. That night, I decided it was time to stop being their ATM and start reclaiming my dignity. I pulled out the manila folder I'd kept buried in my desk drawer, a grim archive of my generosity. Bank statements, receipts, canceled checks, every transaction a testament to my love for my son, now twisted into a chain around my neck. I spread them across my kitchen table, the numbers glaring back at me. $3,200 every month for 72 months, $230,000, $400 total, not counting the $8, 000. I'd wired for their new roof when Sophie complained about a leak ruining her aesthetic. I'd eaten canned soup for months to cover their electric bills when Ethan was between jobs. My own porch light flickered outside, unrepaired, because every dollar went to their suburban castle. My calculator groaned under the weight of my stupidity, but my heart burned with clarity. It was time to cut the cord. I grabbed my phone, scrolled to the contact for First Citizens Bank, and dialed. The automated system chirped its options in that overly cheerful tone, offering English or Spanish as if it cared about people like me. "Customer service," I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. A woman answered, her tone professional but warm. "This is Melissa. How can I assist you today, sir?" I took a breath, the weight of 6 years pressing against my ribs. "I need to cancel an automatic transfer. Account ending in 9,271, $3,200 monthly to Wells Fargo," Melissa typed in the background. Her keyboard clicks a metronome to my resolve. "I see the transfer, Mr. Carter," she said. "You've been making this payment for 6 years. Are you sure you want to cancel it, effective immediately?" I glanced around my kitchen at the chipped cabinets I couldn't afford to replace, the drafty windows I'd patched with duct tape, the life I'd put on hold. Immediately, I confirmed, the word tasting like freedom. "Done," Melissa said. "The transfer is canceled. Anything else I can help you with?" "No," I replied, a small smile creeping onto my face. "That's everything." I hung up, the silence in my house suddenly louder than the December wind howling outside. For the first time in 6 years, I wouldn't wake up on the 15th dreading the hole in my bank account. I walked to my fireplace, the one I hadn't used since Clara's passing, and struck a match. The bank statements caught fire first, curling into ash, followed by the receipts, each flame erasing a piece of my martyrdom. The heat warmed my face, a stark contrast to the cold betrayal I'd carried for too long. My phone buzzed again, Sophie's name flashing like a taunt. I let it ring, picturing her in her pristine kitchen, surrounded by appliances I'd paid for, fuming that I hadn't answered. A text followed. "James, my parents land at Asheville Regional at 3 p.m. tomorrow. Flight 672, Delta. Be there to pick them up. Don't mess this up." The audacity made my blood boil. Less than 24 hours after insulting Clara, after banning me from Christmas, she expected me to play chauffeur for Richard and Evelyn, the parents who thought my mountain roots were beneath their Charleston pedigree. I set the phone face down on the counter and poured myself a glass of bourbon, the good kind, a $60 bottle of Blanton's I'd been saving for a moment worth celebrating. This was it. I raised the glass to Clara's photo on the mantel, her smile still radiant despite the years. "Merry Christmas to us, sweetheart," I said, the bourbon burning my throat like the fire in my chest. Outside, Asheville's streetlights twinkled, families gathering in homes where love didn't come with a price tag. Somewhere across town, Sophie was probably planning her perfect holiday, oblivious to the storm I was about to unleash. The phone buzzed again, another text, probably Ethan this time, pleading or apologizing. I didn't check. For the first time in years, I was done answering to people who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. This was just the beginning. The next morning, the Asheville sun filtered through my kitchen window, casting long shadows across the chipped countertop where I sipped my coffee, real coffee, not the cheap instant stuff I'd lived on for years to fund Ethan and Sophie's lifestyle. The $3,200 monthly mortgage payments were gone, canceled with a single call, and the weight of that decision felt like a chain finally snapped. My porch light still flickered outside, but for the first time in 6 years, I could imagine fixing it without calculating what I'd have to sacrifice. The bourbon from last night still lingered on my tongue, a taste of freedom I hadn't known since Clara was alive. But the peace didn't last long. At 10:15 a.m., my phone buzzed with a fury that matched the pounding on my front door. Sophie's name flashed on the screen, but I didn't need to answer to know who was outside. I opened the door to find Sophie, her designer scarf askew, her makeup smudged from rage or maybe a sleepless night. Behind her stood Richard and Evelyn Bennett, their faces twisted with indignation, as if I'd personally insulted their Charleston pedigree. Richard, in his tailored overcoat, pushed past me into my living room without so much as a nod, his polished shoes scuffing my worn hardwood floor. "What the hell is wrong with you, James?" he bellowed, his voice echoing off the walls of my 1,200 square foot bungalow. "You left us stranded at Asheville Regional for 4 hours. We had to take a $55 taxi because you couldn't be bothered to show up." Evelyn stepped in, her lips pursed into a thin line of disdain, her pearl earrings glinting like accusations. "This is utterly deplorable behavior for a man your age," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of superiority honed over decades of looking down on people like me. Sophie shoved forward, her eyes blazing. You humiliated us, James. Do you have any idea what you've done? My parents flew in from Portland expecting a proper welcome, and you left them standing at baggage claim like common tourists. I stood by the door, my arms crossed, feeling the cold December air seep through the threshold. Humiliated? I said, my voice steady but sharp as a carpenter's chisel. You mean like being told I'm not good enough to sit at your Christmas table? Like hearing my wife's memory trashed because she knew her place better than I do? Sophie's face flushed, but she didn't back down. Don't twist this, James, she snapped. You're just a bitter old carpenter who can't handle that we've moved up in the world. My parents expect refinement, not your backwoods stories and greasy mountain food. The words cut deeper than I expected, but I held my ground, my jaw tight. Refinement, I said, stepping closer, my voice low and dangerous. You mean the kind of refinement I paid for? The $230,400 in mortgage payments, the $50,000 down payment, the $2,500 KitchenAid mixer you used twice. That kind of refinement? Richard's face turned a shade of red that rivaled the Christmas lights outside. You don't get to throw numbers in our faces, he growled. I've got connections in this town, James. I sit on the board of the Asheville Chamber of Commerce. You think you can disrespect us like this and walk away unscathed? You're about to learn what happens when you cross people like us. Evelyn nodded, her smile sharp enough to slice through my resolve. Actions have consequences, James, she said, and yours will be very public. We know people who can make sure everyone in Asheville hears about your little stunt. Sophie grabbed her father's arm, her voice rising. Let's go, Daddy. He's not worth our time. He's just a nobody who thinks he's somebody because he wrote a few checks. The venom in her words was matched only by the entitlement in her eyes, the same eyes that had looked at me like I was a servant for years. This is my house, I said, my voice cutting through their tirade like a saw through soft pine. And I want you out, now. Richard jabbed a finger toward my chest, stopping just short of touching me. This isn't over, he hissed. You'll regret this, Carter. I promise you that. They stormed out, their rental car peeling out of my driveway, leaving a cloud of exhaust and anger in their wake. I closed the door, the deadbolt clicking with a satisfying finality. My heart pounded, not with fear but with a strange, exhilarating certainty. They thought they could intimidate me, shame me into submission, but they just lit a fuse. I walked to my kitchen, poured another cup of coffee, and stared out at the Blue Ridge Mountains. This wasn't just about a missed airport pickup or a canceled mortgage payment anymore. This was war, and I was ready to fight. The December chill bit at my knuckles as I sat in my truck, parked across the street from Ethan and Sophie's glowing 3,500 square foot home in Asheville's upscale Biltmore Park neighborhood. It was Christmas Eve, 6:45 p.m., and their driveway was packed with cars, Lexuses, BMWs, the kind of vehicles that screamed wealth. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see silhouettes moving around their dining room, laughter spilling out like a mockery of the family I'd once had. My briefcase sat heavy on the passenger seat, stuffed with evidence of my sacrifices, bank statements showing $230,400 in mortgage payments over 6 years, receipts for the $50,000 down payment, the $12,000 deck, the $2,500 KitchenAid mixer Sophie barely used. I'd spent the last 3 days organizing it all, printing 15 copies, one for each guest at their perfect holiday dinner. Tonight, they'd learn who really paid for their polished facade. I stepped out of the truck, my breath fogging in the crisp mountain air, and adjusted the navy suit I'd worn to Clara's funeral 7 years ago. It still fit, a reminder of the man I used to be before I became a doormat for my son and his wife. The front door was unlocked, of course. Sophie loved boasting about how safe their neighborhood was, as if my West End bungalow was some crime-ridden slum. I slipped inside, the warm air hitting me with the scent of roasted turkey and expensive wine. From the dining room, I heard Evelyn's voice, sharp and condescending. "Oh, darling, we don't do potlucks in our family. It's just not our style." Laughter followed, the kind that made my blood boil. Their family. After everything they'd done to exclude me. I walked into the dining room, briefcase in hand, and 15 faces turned toward me, a mix of shock, confusion, and horror. Sophie froze, her wine glass hovering mid-air, a drop of red splashing onto her pristine white tablecloth. Ethan's face drained of color, his fork clattering against his plate. Richard and Evelyn looked like they'd seen a ghost, their mouths half open. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice calm but carrying the weight of 6 years of betrayal. I set my briefcase on their marble sideboard, the one I'd paid $4,000 for when Sophie insisted their old one was tacky. "I hope you don't mind me crashing your Christmas celebration." Sophie found her voice first, shrill and panicked. "James, this is outrageous. You need to leave right now." I ignored her, snapping open the briefcase with a deliberate click. "Actually," I said, pulling out the first stack of documents, "I think your guests deserve to know who's been footing the bill for this house, this dinner, this entire lifestyle you've been flaunting." A woman in a cashmere sweater, probably one of Evelyn's charity friends, leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "What's he talking about, Sophie?" she asked. Sophie stammered. He's having some kind of breakdown. Ethan, do something." I moved around the table, placing a packet of evidence in front of each guest. "Here's the truth," I said, my voice steady as I handed out the bank statements. 6 years, $230,400 in mortgage payments, a $50,000 down payment from my home equity loan, $12,000 for the deck out back, $2,500 for that mixer Sophie used twice. I paid for the curtains, the floors, the chandelier above your heads, all of it. The room fell silent except for the rustle of papers as guests flipped through the documents, their eyes widening at the numbers. A man in a tailored blazer gasped, "This is unbelievable." The woman next to him, holding a receipt for the $8,000 roof I'd funded, shook her head. "Sophie, how could you not tell us?" Sophie's composure cracked, her voice rising. "It's not like that. James offered to help us. We never asked for anything." I pulled out a printed screenshot of her latest Instagram post, showing her posing in front of the kitchen I'd paid for, captioned, "Living our best life." "You didn't ask," I said, holding it up. "You begged for granite countertops, for designer furniture, for everything to impress your followers. And when I offered to bring my smoked turkey for Christmas, you told me I wasn't good enough because my mountain ways would embarrass your parents." Evelyn gasped, clutching her pearls. "That's not what we meant," she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. A gray-haired man at the end of the table, flipping through the bank statements, looked up at Richard. "Is this true? You let this man bankroll your daughter's life and then banned him from Christmas?" Richard's face turned ashen, his usual arrogance faltering. "It's complicated," he muttered. "Complicated?" I said, stepping closer to the table. "You called me a nobody," said my wife knew her place better than I did. "You thought you could erase me from my son's life while living off my money." The room was a powder keg, and I just lit the fuse. A woman in a red dress stood up, glaring at Sophie. "This is disgraceful. You should be ashamed." The murmurs grew louder, accusations flying as the guests turned on their hosts. I closed my briefcase, straightened my tie, and looked at Ethan, who hadn't said a word. "Enjoy your dinner," I said. It's the last one I'm paying for. As I walked out, the sound of their crumbling social empire was sweeter than any Christmas carol. The echoes of the Christmas Eve showdown still rang in my ears as I sat at my kitchen table in Asheville, the Blue Ridge Mountains a quiet backdrop to my resolve. I'd left Ethan and Sophie's dinner in chaos, their guests clutching the bank statements that exposed their lies. $230,000, $400 in mortgage payments, $50,000 for their down payment, $12,000 for their deck, all funded by my sacrifices. But Richard's parting threat lingered like smoke. "You'll regret this, Carter. I promise you that." I knew he wasn't bluffing. A man like Richard Bennett, with his Asheville Chamber of Commerce connections and Charleston elite swagger, wouldn't let a nobody like me humiliate him without a fight. 3 days later, on the 27th of December, I found out just how far he'd go. I was sipping my morning coffee, the first decent blend I'd bought in years, when I opened the Asheville Citizen-Times. There, on page 2, was my face an old photo from my carpentry business website, grainy and unflattering. The headline screamed, "Local retiree abandons inn, laws at airport amid holiday storm." My blood ran cold. The article painted me as a heartless old man who'd left Richard and Evelyn Bennett, respected community members, stranded at Asheville Regional Airport for 4 hours in freezing conditions. Freezing conditions? It was 54 degrees and sunny that day. The story quoted Richard, "We were shocked that someone we considered family could treat us with such cruelty." No mention of the $230,400 I'd paid for their daughter's house. No mention of Sophie's insults about Clara. No mention of their Christmas ban. Just me, the villain, in black and white for all of Asheville to judge. I read the article 3 times, each word fueling a fire in my chest. The byline belonged to Margaret Hayes, a lifestyle editor with no history of covering scandals. A quick search on my laptop revealed the truth. Margaret's editor was a golf buddy of Richard's from the Biltmore Forest Country Club. This wasn't journalism, it was a hit job, orchestrated by a man who thought his connections could bury me. But they'd made a fatal mistake. By dragging my name through the mud, they'd given me a platform. I wasn't just a retired carpenter anymore. I was a man with nothing left to lose and a story to tell. I spent the next 2 days building my case. I gathered every piece of evidence. Bank statements showing the $230,400 in mortgage payments, receipts for the $50,000 down payment, screenshots of Sophie's Instagram posts flaunting the kitchen I'd funded, captioned, "Blessed beyond measure." I found emails from Sophie, casually asking for $3,000 for a new HVAC or $8,000 for a roof, as if my savings were her personal piggy bank. I contacted Laura Thompson, a freelance journalist who'd written for Mountain Xpress, Asheville's independent paper. Unlike Margaret, Laura had a reputation for digging into the truth, no matter who it upset. I emailed her the evidence, along with a detailed timeline of my 6 years of support and the betrayal that followed. "This isn't just about money," I wrote. "It's about a family that used me, insulted my late wife, and tried to ruin my name when I stood up for myself." Laura called me within hours. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice sharp with interest. "This is explosive. Can you meet me today?" We met at a coffee shop in West Asheville, where I handed her the manila folder thick with proof. She flipped through it, her eyes widening at the numbers. "You paid $230,400 for their mortgage?" she asked, incredulous. "And they banned you from Christmas because you're a carpenter?" I nodded, my jaw tight. They said my mountain ways didn't fit their refined holiday. Laura's pen moved furiously across her notebook. "This is going to shake Asheville," she said. On the 30th of December, Mountain Xpress published Laura's story. Asheville father betrayed, how a family's greed cost them everything. The article laid it all bare, my $230,400 in payments. Sophie's social media boasts Richard and Evelyn's snobbery, the Christmas ban, and their smear campaign in the Citizen Times. It spread like wildfire across Asheville's social media, with hashtags like #JusticeForJames trending on local X posts. By New Year's Eve, Richard was forced to resign from the Chamber of Commerce board after members called his actions unconscionable. Sophie's Instagram followers plummeted, her perfect life posts now mocked as hypocrisy. Evelyn's charity luncheons were canceled, her social circle shrinking as fast as their reputation. I sat back in my recliner, the Mountain Xpress article on my lap, a glass of bourbon in hand. The Blue Ridge Mountains stood sentinel outside my window, and for the first time in years, I felt like I'd won something bigger than money, my dignity. But this wasn't the end. Richard and Sophie thought they could silence me with a newspaper hit. They were about to learn that I wasn't done fighting. Resolution and consequences. 23, không, 27, không. The fallout from the Mountain Xpress article hit Ethan and Sophie's world like a wrecking ball through their 3,500 square foot Asheville home. By mid-January, the certified letter arrived at my modest West End bungalow, its official seal glaring under the flickering porch light I'd finally fixed. Notice of default, it read, $9,600 in arrears, 14 days to bring the account current or face foreclosure. The mortgage I'd canceled $3,200 a month for 6 years, $230,400 total had been the backbone of their suburban fantasy. Without it, Ethan and Sophie were drowning, their perfect life unraveling as fast as their bank account. I set the letter on my kitchen counter, next to a fresh mug of coffee, and read it like a weather report from a distant city, interesting, but no longer my problem. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of their betrayal lift, replaced by a quiet strength I hadn't known since Clara was alive. My phone had been buzzing for weeks, first with Sophie's frantic voicemails, her voice cracking as she begged for just one more payment to save their house. I blocked her number after the second message, her fake sweetness as hollow as the designer vases I'd paid for. Richard and Evelyn's calls followed, their polished Charleston accents now tinged with desperation, but I let those go to voicemail too. Their social empire had crumbled. Richard's resignation from the Asheville Chamber of Commerce was just the start. Local X posts buzzed with screenshots of Sophie's old Instagram captions. Her blessed beyond measure posts now a punchline in coffee shops from Biltmore Village to West Asheville. Evelyn's charity luncheons, once the talk of the town, were canceled, her former friends whispering about her family's disgrace over glasses of Pinot at the Grove Park Inn. But it was Ethan's knock on my door that caught me off guard. It was a chilly Thursday evening in late February, the Blue Ridge Mountains dusted with snow outside my window. I opened the door to find my son, no longer the confident banker in press suits, but a man who looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 months. Dark circles framed his eyes, his $500 blazer wrinkled, his shoulders slumped under the weight of his choices. "Dad," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk." I stepped aside, letting him into my living room, now warmed by a new rug and a freshly painted wall, small upgrades I could finally afford without their mortgage draining me dry. "Nice place," he said, his eyes lingering on the new oak coffee table, a $300 splurge from a local Asheville craftsman. "It's what happens when you stop funding someone else's life," I replied, settling into my recliner. "Coffee?" He shook his head, perching on the edge of my couch like he didn't deserve to get comfortable. "Dad, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. For Christmas, for letting Sophie and her parents treat you like that, for everything. I leaned back, studying him. Go on, I said, my tone even but unyielding. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting to the floor. I didn't know they were going to smear you in the Citizen Times. When I found out, God, Dad, the things they said about you, about Mom. They called her a nobody who knew her place. My jaw tightened at the mention of Clara, but I kept my voice steady. And what did you do about it, Ethan? When they insulted your mother, the woman who worked nights cleaning schools to pay for your college? He flinched, tears welling in his eyes. I should have stood up to them years ago. I let Sophie and her parents pull me away from you, from everything we were. I'm so sorry. The silence stretched between us, heavy with 6 years of mistakes. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked, a normal sound in a normal world where sons didn't betray their fathers. The house is in foreclosure, Ethan said finally, his voice barely audible. We can't make the payments without your help. I leaned forward, meeting his gaze. $230,400, Ethan. That's what I gave you over 6 years. $50,000 for the down payment, $12,000 for the deck. And you let your wife's family treat me like garbage. You don't get to ask for more. Ethan's face crumpled, tears spilling down his cheeks. I've lost everything, Dad. The house, Sophie's respect, her parents' approval. I've lost you. I watched him, the boy I'd raised, the man who'd chosen their world over mine. You didn't lose me, I said, my voice softer but firm. You gave me away. There's a difference. He wiped his eyes, his hands shaking. Can you ever forgive me? I stood, walking to the mantel where Clara's photo sat beside a new one, me with Aunt Linda's family at Thanksgiving, my first holiday in years with people who wanted me there. I forgave you weeks ago, I said, but forgiveness doesn't mean going back. It means you start from scratch, Ethan. You earn my respect, not my money. He nodded, standing slowly, his shoulders straighter than when he'd arrived. You're right, he said. I'll figure it out. I have to. As he walked to the door, he turned back. Seeing you stand up to them at Christmas, I was ashamed, but I was proud too. I didn't respond, just watched him step into the cold. The door closed, and I poured myself a glass of bourbon, the same Blanton's I'd opened on Christmas Eve. Outside, Asheville's mountain stood tall, a reminder that some things endure. I'd rebuilt my life, piece by piece, and I wasn't going back. As I stood on my back porch, the Asheville mountains stretching before me, I raised a glass of bourbon to the spring sky. The Blue Ridge peaks glowing under the first buds of March. 7 years after losing Clara, 6 years after pouring $230,400 into a home that shut me out, I'd learned a hard truth. Family isn't about who you pay for, but who stands by you. I'd spent too long being a checkbook for people who saw my carpenter's hands as a stain on their polished world. But standing up at that Christmas dinner, in the pages of the Mountain Xpress, gave me back something worth more than money, my dignity. If you've ever felt pushed aside, told you're not enough, know this. Your worth isn't in what you give, but in what you refuse to let others take. You deserve a life as bright as you're willing to build. If this story moved you, please drop a like. Share your thoughts in the comments, maybe a time you stood up for yourself, and subscribe to Honor and Home for more stories of resilience. Let's keep telling the truth together. Here's to building a life that's truly yours.